Shruti, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I've seen so much of you online, so good to meet you on with face.
Yes, I love it. It's always fun having these conversations after I've seen people follow them on Twitter for a lot of time. And there is a lot to discuss in this conversation, but I want to start with something a little bit lighter. And from that Twitter and my research of you as well, one thing I have to bring up. Gandhi Ventures. Why is this not called Gandhi Ventures? Why is it Array? I'm going to start right there. You had a great opportunity just sitting there waiting, like the greatest venture firm name of all time. How did that not become the name? I have to know.
Trademark issues. Also, I'm not a nonprofit.
Like, what is this firm you're running? Like, not Gandhi. Yeah, that would be a conflict. I agree. So we'll settle for Array, which is also great. A great name as well. That definitely works. What I'm curious about for people who aren't as familiar, where are you focused in terms of investment at Array Ventures?
Thanks for asking. We're a B2B enterprise fund. We invest in exactly the stage founders are starting the company. Most of our companies, the founders have raised zero capital before our investment, and they're just forming the docs and incorporating and all that good stuff. So we invest. We call it pre-seed, but I should call it the angel route. I don't know. Those names are all up in the air these days.
I agree.
So, but I say first check into enterprise B2B data infrastructure, cloud security style companies. That's what we do.
This is such an important stage, obviously, just this kind of first check, first round in terms of capital for this. And it's needed by so many founders. You see them all the time, people reaching out on Twitter, people kind of raising their first funds, especially when you look at like underrepresented founders who struggle to raise capital that need this early initial stage. How did you decide to start your own venture firm? And did you know right away, like, I want to be first check immediately? This is what I want. This is the need. Just take me through the beginning origin story real quick.
That's a good question. I would say that the first and foremost reason I got into venture was to understand venture better. I had a company that failed, and for many reasons that I didn't think it should have failed for. So when I decided to kind of learn more about venture-backed journey and venture scale growth, that's when I said I'm going to go into venture. And then that was my experience I wanted to take into then going and starting a company again. As I decided to go start another company, it became a fund. That is Array Ventures. The feedback from a lot of the founders that already worked for a few years in was, you went to bat for us. You understand the stage really well. You understand what it takes to build company at ground zero because of your technical background,
Yeah.
and you understand the go-to-market motion. So if you're investing, we would love to figure out a way to invest with you or something of that effect with a lot of my founders that already had the ability to do so. This is way back in 2015, right? 2016 timeframe. So when I thought about starting the firm eventually, it was kind of a shift of like, well, it's starting a company. It was not the company I thought I would be starting, but I'll do it because I was very excited about doing that at some point in my future. So why not now? Um, and with that, and I already had a lot of my founders who had committed to making that effort happen for me as well, which I'm super thankful for. The thing I just knew well was what I'd learned, which is how to get from the 0 to 1 to 10 stage. And that is what I'd mastered. I can't be an expert in the 10 to 100 stage right now or any other. So my goal was to truly help companies and founders, you know, take away that time it takes to learn that, because I would share my experience in that phase to help them grow faster. Um, and that is my reason of starting at this stage. I can't even think of going at another stage because this is the stage I love. I think someone called it like kingmaker. Like, this is the stage when you like invest in someone who has no. We all don't know where they're going to end up, and then they do end up in amazing places. One of those companies is actually a company your firm has invested in, Placer.
Yeah.
I shared it with Gail, and it was so early. I'd just done their pre-seed, and they were raising a seed, and who knew where it was going to end up? It's now a unicorn company.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. We thank you for that, by the way. For sure. For sure. That's a big part of the venture game, as it is, finding these investments through co-investors. At that time when you were raising, because there's a number of emerging managers now. We're at an interesting time in the market where it's crazy. There's a pullback in some ways from obviously the market being down and everything, but you're raising then. So that was 2015, 2016 timeframe. How was that first raise? I'm just curious because solo GP, woman GP, just take me through that raise for you at that point.
Well, so once you have initial commitment from folks, you still get into this amazing determination of going and wanting to raise a little bit more, which is what I did. So we went after I went after my network of people I knew and had worked with for years. It's not easy, especially as you said, solo GP woman. It's not. It wasn't even like 1% of the thing then.
Yeah.
um, it is. They may. I'm thinking if there were any. Oh yeah, there were a couple men doing that at
Yeah.
that time, but yeah, not a single woman at that really at that time. So it was
That's
very
crazy.
difficult. I can't you know in any possible way I can't sugarcoat into like saying this was fine, you should do it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't, but I had an exit strategy. If I wasn't able to raise a certain amount of capital, um, I wasn't going to do it. Or if I did, and if things weren't going well in a few years, it would be like a great. I don't think I should be managing your money, kind of a mindset. So it's always open to saying, because at the end of the day, this is running a venture fund is also committing to growing people's money.
Yeah.
And if you don't think about it that way, then it just becomes like experimentation dollars. And I want to look at these people in their eye years from now and still be their friends and still be in their trusted network. Um, so yeah, it wasn't easy. And then all the random meetings you take to make that happen is the worst part of being a woman solo GP
Yeah.
at odd
a
hours.
lot a lot to that. I know. Yeah, that process. I mean, even back then, what was your angle, your pitch around that? Because as you said, there wasn't really any women at that point. Obviously, a lot less. Like, what was your pitch around that? We're like, okay, this is where I know. This is why you should invest with me. Because to your point, your job is to grow their money. It's like, what was your pitch back then? I'm just curious.
Simple, gen- gender agnostic, but not enough venture funds out there doing first check in the true enterprise companies,
Yeah,
um, which is still true. There are a lot of generalist funds, but funds who can truly understand the ins and outs of like enterprise software purchasing, investing in security, cloud, data struct like data generally.
yeah,
And at that time, I called it AIML, but I don't like it has become like everything is AIML and now. But
true.
that is a core of what we invest in. But understanding that at the pre-seed stage is very different. So that was a pitch, and it's just evolved it into a little bit more crisp version of that today. But that's what we started out with as well. The pitch was very simple, though. Not people enough people doing it. Few handful of firms that I know. I work well with them. Many of them are investing in me. Um, that's it, and I've done it for 20 years.
Well, that's what I was going to get into. Okay, that's exactly what I want to get into. Perfect. With your experience being at this stage and with this industry in terms of enterprise and everything as well, and that experience, what are you looking for? And what, because you mentioned Placer early on, which became Unicorn. Obviously, you have a good track record already. Been at Array itself in 2015, 2016. But like, what are you looking for in these companies then? Enterprise at the earliest of stages, first check. Take me through some of the things like your process. I want to get into the brain of Shruti. I'm curious.
Well, I was an engineer for a decade, um, and I was on a lot of the sides of the business at big companies as well. So I was solving pain points for what I would have wanted at the time,
Yeah.
or even now. And now it's kind of grown into what my companies want and many other things. So it wasn't that far off. The the solution I look for is what I call like that brings agitation to employees in their company because they couldn't solve it there and they want to go solve it. Um, and any amount of money is not going to help them stop doing that, like leaving their companies and solving it, leaving a lot of money on the table because they think it's so big enough than being at their existing companies. So that's how it started out. It still is that. Uh, so what we solve for is real pain points in enterprise stack, and that's doesn't require like a lot of brain around prediction around what this is going to be. It's just I know this needs to be solved for.
To that point, with that and that being one of the areas of it, you mentioned that already. What, like, are you looking then for someone who has just deep expertise in being having that problem for a long period of time? They've experienced it in so many different ways, or at this company before. I just want to dive a little bit deeper into that side of it with enterprise.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things we look for. So our founders actually skew on the more experienced side because they have done this at their previous companies. They know exactly what they want to do it one more time, um, and then make a lot of money around it because their existing companies are not doing it correctly, or they found a different, better approach with a new stack, or the go to market is going to be different, right? So they know the space really well. That's one of the big requirements for our founders, and they're very technical.
Very technical as well. Yeah, obviously important in that regard as well. I'm curious with one thing I saw on the website. It was like Array brings a unique twist to venture capital, is what it says. Think of us as your first business development hire. Tell me about more about that and the after the investment, what founders can expect and why they end up working with you at Array and take you on their cap table.
Yeah, I used to literally tell people like a lot of the companies I looked forward to even investing in or didn't, I would still introduce them to a lot of customers. Um, Looking back now, like we've changed that a little bit, but oftentimes founders work with like a few of of their original customers or people from our network, um, which is what I say like is your business development hire. Like the first set of things you're looking for is your customer development side of um, team that you don't have, and if it's founder led sales. And so having the intros, warm intros to people we know really well in a network is really valuable. So that's what we do. And it's just a straightforward thing. I know that the customer is also looking for that solution because of what I said, which is we're trying to solve pain point in enterprises that we know exist deeply. Um, and for us, it's more being like a matchmaker at that time.
Is a lot of this with the deals then? You've kind of mapped out some of the pain points already you know of, or is it you're still kind of just bringing, depends on the founder obviously as well, but like, are you mapping out and kind of have an idea of, well, we're looking for something that's in this area because you have that expertise? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, yeah. That's like Placer is a good example of my master's thesis was in the location based service category. And I worked a lot on the space at my previous employer. Um, so it was like very well known for what I would look for in that category.
Yeah.
And that's what so end up, I mean, even though a lot of people didn't want to take that bet and always were nervous about Placer's position in the market, I knew that they were going to solve a pain point that was very important, and they were not going to get into the hurdles that a lot of people thought that they would hit them. So that was why I took that early bet.
Okay, we have to talk more about that. You said people weren't interested in that. Take me through more of that. You said they weren't seeing the vision quite like you were. Explain that.
Well, it's like every time you see a company, it looks like a crowded. You know, there are not many problems in the world, especially in the enterprise world, that don't look crowded.
Sure.
You know, the so when you that's just true for most companies. It's all crowded until something breaks out, and most people want to invest in those breakout companies. And so the job I'm in is a different job, which is I can't expect breakout when they're just starting out. So I'm looking for very different signals. The signals are more about how you're solving this, and let's dig into like what is going to do different. Like how are you going to differentiate technically um, in this crowded market? So most companies at my stage look like not that great companies, and I like it because I get a good set of folks that want to work with me at that point because everyone else is saying no.
Yeah, like this is an opportunity then for you, which is perfect, which works out well. I I have to ask about, we haven't really talked about this yet, but like with you being a solo GP, take me through like the complexities of that and like maybe pros cons of that, because we see a number of solo GPs now. I think I forget who it was on Twitter was saying like 5% of the job of venture capital as a solo GP is sexy, the rest is not. I'm just curious for you as a GP, like as a solo GP in particular, the complexities around that, challenges with being a solo GP for others who are maybe starting venture funds or emerging managers already. Just take me through that.
So hard. Um, it's like when you get that capital commitment from people, you do not remember what else you need. You don't know what you need, what else you need to do. The thing I tell people, like anyone who wants to be in venture, just doing deals, is to just go join a bigger firm. Uh, you work with a partner or team. You never know where the money came from or how it was raised. You're just, creating a market map and finding the best companies and investing. And that's great. But if you really want to truly understand venture cycle, money flow, all the work that goes in the front and the back, you actually have to be like a jack of all trades. I mean, as you are, right? Like you have to do marketing, you have to figure out space you want, like other areas you want to invest in. You have to figure out like management with your LPs. So many other things you have to do. And yeah, you have to wear, I tell people like I wear six hats in the same second, right?
Yeah.
Like talking to you, I'm like, okay, this is relevant for marketing. This is relevant for an area I want to invest in. This is relevant for something I want to share with my LPs. And so now every second I'm thinking, and my brain is split into these different compartments. Um, so that's what solo GP is like. It would be nice if you actually have someone to do it with. It is very hard to add someone down the road after you've raised some amount of capital. Um, so until you hit a particular point, and then you can just hire some good people. But to be able to, you know, just do something big out of the gate, you should probably, uh, you know, work with other people, which I highly recommend. And it was a mistake on my end, or however it turned out. Um, and at that time, there were not many solo GPs too. I could like have just called on. There were some,
Yeah.
and I was solving a lot of these problems on my own. Even or AngelList was on its early days, so like just being doing docs on their platform was not even like a thing at that time. And getting working with shitty lawyers and um, it's taken its turn. So I would say it's not easy, and you have to explore all of these on your own while you still find the best deal out there.
It's a lot. It's
Yeah,
definitely a lot.
yeah. And it's
And
not for
I
everyone. So that person was
fair.
doing that was right. But it's also personality, right? Like at certain point, I love what I do, and to me, being able to not move fast, slowing down because of different decision making process between multiple team members, all that is also not something that I want to optimize on, right? Like at this point, we figured out a good system around all that. But when you're starting out, you can, your white space on all these categories, and you can, grow from there. So I would say, like, if I were to start another firm, I would definitely think about doing it with someone at that time.
Yeah. With your firm, with Array, then going from fund one, which was $12-ish million, going from fund one to the $56 million fund you raised, announced at the end of 2021. Obviously, from fund one to fund two, then now you're at fund three. There's a certain expectation going from like the first one, you don't have a ton of traction on that particular fund when you're raising fund two. But as you get to like fund three, you have fund one to look at, you have fund two to look at. Just take me through this fundraise that you did for fund three, differences, what to expect for, because there's going to be merchant managers raising fund three at some point. So I'm just curious on for you, what you learned from that experience raising fund three, how that process was for you.
I guess for me, the process was I'd been returning capital already in fund one. So, because I told you, for me, the biggest metric is I have someone's money, and I'm still old school around that. Like, you know, I want to be able to go to their weddings and not worry about losing that money for them.
Yeah.
So, having said that, the biggest goal I had always focused was on the DPI metric, and I just returned some. I've returned 30% of fund one, and I just returned some additional capital. So when we started fund three, I think most of my LPs have been back from fund one to two to three,
Yeah.
and I'm very fortunate for that. And then we closed them, and then we added a few other folks, new folks that we love working with, um, in kind of like the second close after that.
And with fund three being a $56 million fund, different, much different than a smaller fund in terms of that management fee. And then you can do a little bit different things with that. How have you thought about just with the team and support as a solo GP when you raise a little bit bigger fund? How have you thought about that with Array as
Yeah,
well?
we are hiring. So I'm a little shy of posting the job on Twitter because I don't have the bandwidth to go through all that. So I
Yeah.
guess you and Gail got lucky. Um, But I am looking for an associate. For us, the criteria is that I want them to be a little bit more technical. And so that's been a little bit of a pause right now for me. If I do find great people, I'm open to hiring one or two people. And we did hire a chief of staff, so that has been a great um, help from my calendar perspective.
And that was after Fund 3. You got chief of staff.
Yeah, so
Okay.
far
And
before that, I was mostly alone, and I had uh, two other folks like helping as analysts. But yeah,
now you're expanding with this new capital, which is great. I know I talked to Samar Hernandez recently, who raised a $52 million fund. And like, yes, building out the team a little bit more is always great. Have a little bit more help because of how many roles you take on, which is kind of insane the amount of work. I just see like, even just I see like Gail at Vitalize and like, you do so much. I'm like, how do you have time for anything? And like, you need the response time. You're like, oh yeah, it's like a lot of work, obviously, with that. Um, with that as well, just thinking about your kind of strategy with what you're doing and expertise as well. How do you look at? I know you kind of talked about a little bit helping companies after the investment, but just allocating your time as a solo GP with okay, you fundraise, but like in some ways you're kind of always raising your maybe update your LPs, et cetera. But also with helping the companies and that side of things versus new investments, like where does your time go? I'm always just curious on that because like there's not a lot of expectations. People don't really understand how this works. I'm just curious for you what that looks like.
yeah, it's a lot. Um, we do like an average of 8 to 9 deals a year,
Okay.
so time is time is necessary to spend on like that is the job. And in terms of helping founders, I'm very careful about we take board seats, so we only take limited board seats to be able to
Yeah.
help particular set of founders that we are lead investors in, and that's mostly what we invest in as well. Anyway,
So 8 or 9 companies that taking board seats with that as well. And with these check size that you have on your Twitter, it's like 500K to 1.5 million in these early rounds. Then you're leading then most of these deals, correct?
uh, yeah, if we're not, we don't take board seat, and we're not that involved.
Okay, cool. And with that too, just taking a step back into like portfolio construction as well. So you 8 or 9, how many companies are you going to end up doing then in terms of your fund 3 here?
Probably 30,
Okay.
25 to 30.
Okay. And so 25 to 30 companies that I know there's varying opinions on like ownership targets and everything. Do you have that? Has that always been something you wanted? I don't know if you did it in fund 1 and fund 2, but in fund 3, also have ownership targets. And how did you come to that?
Yeah, we've well, fund one we didn't, but fund two and three we've had ownership targets, and it's mostly to optimize on my time because as I said, I really care about getting involved. And I learned in fund one, if I get involved and don't have enough ownership, I feel really bad about it. um, and I feel like I should have been more better with my time management because everyone is super willing to use your time. Um, but yeah, so that's where I felt like I need to change my equation to be more efficient and more effective um, as an investor in a company.
Yeah, having those bigger positions in it as well. And it's interesting. There's so many different strategies in venture, which is kind of fun to interview people and see what they're doing as well.
I think it's mostly like what works for you, and everyone's different, and everyone's fund is different. So I think it's more about like what resonates well for you.
Yeah. One thing too, I want to talk about a little bit. I know I mentioned Samara Hernandez and obviously mentioned Gail as well. And you said in 2015, 2016, like the amount of like women solo GPs, maybe not any, if one or two. And obviously we've got a little bit more, but it's still pretty abysmal in terms of that. And part of your time is probably, I imagine people reach out to you as well and want to talk. It's like, oh, Shruti's been around for a number of years as a solo GP. Take me through those conversations just in terms of how you look at this whole ecosystem and getting more women investors, women in obviously more women founders, which is helpful from having women investors. But how do you look at that and what you're seeing in the industry? Optimistic on the changes? I'm just curious what you're seeing.
I have been so happy. Like as you and I were talking before, starting out alone and being like one of the few women GPs solo, doing deals in very men heavy investor world. I was in my corner, retreated, just doing my
Yeah.
thing, and calls with most VCs men mostly were what deal, whatever. And now my calls are so great. I love it when they're like swapping deals and I'm talking about my kid and I'm talking about where we shop and I'm talking about like, I don't know, n number of amazing things that I feel so happy about doing versus like just doing it as an obligation. So the world has tremendously changed, not enough, but changed quite a bit since I've started. And there are a lot more amazing women investors and men, but the change has been more around women. And yeah, I'm so much happier in my day to be able to talk to certain people about deals and about everything else in my life, which I don't tend to differentiate much on. So people I work with are also my friends, and I go to their weddings, and it's nice to be able to have that kind of relationships as well because you have to feel good about what you do. And for me, it's the same. It's a crossover, my personal life and private life. So yeah, I think that's a big, amazing shift that's happened.
Yeah, and you can tell that actually from like your Twitter. If people look around, there's some funny things in there. One tweet in particular about newborn gas, I found hilarious. By the way, if you want to reference it, July 1st, 2022. Look back at the archive. But I found that hilarious. It's like bringing to that point your whole self like in a board meeting talking about topics. You're like, I never really thought I'd necessarily this would come up, but you gotta love that that's an option.
We're humans, end of the day, right?
Yeah. It's such a people-driven business, which I think a lot of times you don't necessarily realize. I remember talking to Gail a while back, and she like way a long time ago, even before like Irish Angels, like in the day, was like, yeah, that is just like more finance and numbers and all of that. But especially when you're an early stage venture, this is people all the time. Like that's what the business is, which is kind of interesting.
Well, the thing is, there's so much out there. You can work with so many different people, and just like getting money too. There's so many options for founders, and for you as an investor, there's so much
Yeah.
deal flow. At the end of the day, why invest in something you don't like enjoy and feel bad about, or
Yeah.
right? Like it might be a hot deal, but like I found like I don't want to be anxious around something. I don't want to like be like sometimes in enterprise that ends up happening, certain kind of founders have higher pedigree and exits and stuff, and they make you feel bad about something or the other, and you're so more cautious, and then get into after all these years I get into a comfortable place where I'm like, you know what, here's what I'm bringing to the table, and I'm happy investing in that.
I'm curious with this as well, and your progression from what you've done at Array already. You've seen so many companies, and any venture capitalist is like one of the biggest draws of talking to VCs. Like they just see so many companies, they see so many deals in different parts of the industry. And you mentioned like you're so deep in enterprise. What trends in enterprise or areas are you excited about? Things you're seeing? We have to dive deeper into that because I know you look at deals all the time. So let's talk a little bit more what you're seeing.
Well, I think it's like two ways to think about it. The first way is in enterprise stack, you can always every like decade keep reinvesting in the next gen because the stack we have today was probably built 10 years ago. Um, and yeah, and like even like the most popular companies, right, like
Yeah.
Snowflake and others were built a long time ago. So in enterprise, there's like certain functions, repeatable functions you just need software for. So I just invest in the next gen of that. That's one way to look at it. The other thing is in the stack, the most important thing that has happened in the last 5 years is proliferation of AI, machine learning, NLP
Yeah.
and others, which I told you I don't even call those things out anymore because those things are just part of the business now. But your stack is not ready for that business, that kind of backend and infrastructure for most companies in the world. So for us, that's a second perspective of like, again, why is this important, and how does the new data AI movement, create a need for you and your company to buy a certain kind of software. So that's how we think about it. There's obviously the third world, like behavioral change of like future work and remote work and other things that always come and go. But for us, those are more opportunistic investments at that time on how we think about the trend at large.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I mean, we had a pretty gnarly last 2 years here in the world. Has that shifted anything in terms of your views on things, of what you're seeing, et cetera? I'm just curious on what you've seen then.
Uh, I mean, yes, the we kind of looked at that as like the world is changing, the way we purchase software is changing, the way we interact with our coworkers is changing. So there's definitely that. But you know what's funny? Because I've been around and I'm sort of oldie. I see like when I was early in my engineering days, there was this movement called outsourcing, and I was, it's not that it's the same, but it's kind of your dev shops remote kind of a thing, right? Like, and I was at that time engineer, but getting burnt out because I was working teams all around the world.
Hmm.
Um, Vietnam, India, Japan. I was in East Coast at the time, so Almaden, California, probably one or two other locations on certain research kind of projects and stuff. And I have to say, like, I quickly realized that it's not sustainable. As a human, we're not robots, and you can't exist in multiple time zones all the time.
Yeah.
So for me, when remote work came about, I knew that it's not a trend I'm doubling down on just yet, because unless someone is very thoughtful about how they're going to take advantage of remote work, and build out teams at large and make it work. So for me, it's a mixed opinion on that. Not it's not like a trend I don't want. It's a trend that I know can burn you out faster than others. So we're very thoughtful about that on how we think our companies should grow.
With that, it brings to mind as well. You mentioned you're hiring. Are you trying to build a team where you are? Or are you trying to build a team remotely then with Array?
I think both, either is fine for me. I think
Okay.
for us, a lot of our customers for our companies end up still being in the Bay Area and such, or there's a large concentration of enterprise companies still in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm open to Seattle, potentially Austin, uh, and maybe New York as well.
Yeah. Open a few different locations. Um, One of the last things I'm curious about here with with everything you do as a solo GP, it is obviously hard. How I've talked to a lot of people about this, whether it be founders who, they go through, it's so crazy building a company. It's so crazy being a solo GP. How do you even take care of like your own kind of mental health? Make sure you can sustain for the long term because that's such a hard thing for anyone. And especially when you're a solo GP running this firm, just say anything more of that for you personally.
So many things I can talk about here, but mental health is very, 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 very important, especially since you're working in your own silo, and there's only few things you can still share with your other colleagues in the space because they're not in your fund.
Yeah.
um, and certain things that happen in the way founders treat you, you can treat founders, LPs treat you. There's like a cone of kind of like of trust
Yeah.
that you have to deal with on certain things. And yeah, and then obviously on the Twitter world you have to show optimism, which is kind of fake. So I
Yeah.
I tend not to do that, at least as much as I can. Um, but yeah, it's hard. Mental health is a topic. I think Brad Feld talked about it first, about him fighting his depression, and but still looking all positive and optimistic, right? Like that's like the weird part of
Yeah.
our jobs. So I try to honestly, like, to me, I could easily tell you like, oh my god, yeah, I go to the gym 10 times, like 5 times a week. I don't know, whatever, all those things. But honestly speaking, I don't have that kind of time. The time I do have is I spend with my family, um, and I also love certain hobbies that are pretty much calming and very much like isolates me from all this, and it's nothing to do with venture. So I love that, and you have to take some time for yourself. Sometimes, like last week, something really irritated me, and it took me a week to get off it. Right, like
Hmm.
that and that happens. Like the world outside can influence you many ways, and it could just be a random tweet, it could just be like a deal you won or lost, right? Or it could be an LP that you're working with. It could be so many things, but you have to find your center. And that I try to do that. End of the day, I remind myself that I am also very lucky to be where I am, and this problem I'm facing is probably a very small thing in the big thing that I'm trying to work with. So, yeah, it's important to remind yourself like where you're trying to go and where you are in that journey and how far you've come.
That is. So true. I think a lot of times these type A people don't do that. They're like always focused on the next thing. And it's like so hard to look back at like all the things you've done already. It's like, well, I'm going to the next thing. And that's a whole nother discussion we
So
could
I
have.
came from nothing and I had no idea what venture capital was, even more like a little bit around a decade ago. And to me, you know, again, that's why I keep repeating my goal is to, I'm a money manager end of the day. Like
Yeah.
SEC qualifies us as that, right? Like we have VC exemptions, but the goal here is to make 10x money in this asset class. That is why people are taking this risk and interest in your fund.
Yeah.
So my North Star is, am I doing that in the right possible way, creating long term impact in the market as well? Like, so the other side of the equation is I'm also, founders are trusting me to take them to put money in them and help them get to the next stage. So am I doing that part? So those are my two kind of North Stars for different audience that I work with.
Yeah. There are a number of stakeholders that you have to deal with. And a lot of
I
times I
know we're
think,
a marketplace. I say I'm a
yeah,
marketplace.
exactly. Exactly. There's like so many things going on. And then it's like even big like once you're in a venture firm, like then you see more of the details too, where you're okay, obviously people know from the outside there's like founders and like some people may understand more of the LP side and how they invest into funds. But then you're like, oh yeah, on top of all that, all the legal providers, all the service providers, like to run the actual fund, you see all of that back office stuff, and you're like, oh wow, there are a lot of moving parts to this
Well, believe me, I
industry.
talk to Gail about that a lot. She's great at it.
Yeah, yes, there she has done a phenomenal job, and also putting people in place in the team to help, just carry some of that load a little bit because it's like there's so much to it. And me just being fly on the wall sometimes or some of that to see like, oh wow, like John's doing this and Net's doing this, Gail's doing this, and you're just like, it's a lot of moving parts for anyone who's in this industry. There's a lot more than just the sexy VC side of things where you get to see these companies. There's like way more under the hood that you don't see, which is interesting once you're in it for sure. And I just want to wrap up with like, where is the best place for founders to reach out to you, get in touch, pitch their company, et cetera, for Array Ventures?
I think Twitter is a great place. It's my Twitter handle is at Shruti ATSHRUTI, and feel free to find me on LinkedIn as well. But usually, that if you want to pitch me, you can also email me on arraydeals@array.vc. So either one of those things, I'm pretty available.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out.